Probably a good metaphor is to think about, when you have a vine that's growing, it needs a trellis to kind of support the direction that you want that vine to grow. And your organizational structure and your processes provide the trellis for your culture to develop.
Your logo is not your brand, no matter how bad you want it, or even if you spent tens of thousands of dollars for it. Hi, I'm Joshua Carlsen, co-founder of Propelo Media. In today's Ask an Expert, I'm going to be sitting down with Denise Lee Yohn. She is a speaker, she's an author, and she's a consultant, having worked with big brands from Frito Lays to Oakley. She's also a reoccurring contributor to Forbes as well as Harvard Business Review. Today, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about branding, specifically where branding and your culture intersect, how you can evaluate and audit that, and what you can do to help make improvements to it. Also going to give you some good ideas about how you can navigate difficult social conditions and topics as it relates to your organization. And finally, we're going to talk about video, how powerful it can be, but what you need to do before you actually hit the record button. Now let's hear what Denise has to say. Denise, I'd like to welcome you to our Ask an Expert series.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Okay, so I want to dive right in and talk about branding, which I think a lot of people and a lot of organizations misinterpret. They think it's the logo. They think it's maybe it's the fancy tagline that they paid somebody for, but they don't realize that your brand, it's just so much deeper. I'd love to open it up to you so that you could really help organizations understand what is really a part of the brand.
Great start. I think part of the problem is the word branding itself, because if you think about it, branding is a term that came from back when people had cattle and ranches and they needed to make sure that they could show ownership of their cows. So they would, sear their mark or brand onto the cow, just so that if someone came across the cow, they'd know who it belongs to. And so I think that there's still this kind of sense of, we just need to make sure that people know that this is our product. And so we're going to sear our logo, or we're going to run that ad, or we're going to, put this tagline on our materials, and then we've branded.
Right.
And so that's why I actually don't use the term branding, and I talk about brand building. And I clarify that your brand is really what you do and how you do it.
Right.
I think like in business school, they'll probably tell you that the, official definition of a brand is that it's the bundle of values and attributes that define what you do for customers and how you do business. But basically, they're just saying your brand is what you do and how you do it. And so when you conceive of your brand that way and you use it, it has so much power because it becomes a kind of strategic guidepost for everything that you do, and a cultural rallying point inside your organization as well.
So as you talk about a strategic kind of guidepost, I want to take that a little bit further, because I think that that's a great way to kind of conceptualize this, which is, I'm an organization. I want to evaluate what we want our brand to be, as well as what our brand actually is today. What are your recommendations for an organization to do that exercise?
Yeah, well, there are brand audits that you can do. And basically what I say, what I advise when I'm talking about a brand audit is to look at your brand from three perspectives. First, look at it from like the context, and not just your competitive context, although that's very important, but also kind of like the broader context of macroeconomic trends, social trends, cultural dynamics, and really understand, is your brand establishing a clear competitive advantage and a clear position in your broader context. The second is your customers. So what do your customers perceive about your brand? Well, first of all, who are your customers?
Right.
What do they need? And then are they perceiving your brand to fulfill those needs and expectations? And then the third is your company, and taking a look at all of your assets and resources, as well as the culture and the people within your organization, to determine is your brand, a reflection or a representation of that accurately. If your organization is not in a place that you want it to be, how does that need to change? And so then once you do that kind of audit of context, customer and company, then you get a pretty good sense of how you're performing. And then you can use any number of tools. Like I recommend a SWOT analysis where you have an objective, which might be to reposition our brand, and then you examine your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats against that objective. But basically, all you're doing is you're kind of just determining, do we have the brand that we want or not? And I will say, and I don't mean this to be like, all salesy promotional, but I do have an online assessment from my last book, Fusion, that is free, and it does help you determine kind of where you are currently with your brand and if that differs from where you want to be. So your listeners or viewers can actually take that assessment and get at least a head start on that brand audit process.
Okay. So once we do this audit now, and I'm glad you kind of compartmentalize the different brand aspects. Obviously, a big part is that customer experience when they're literally interacting and they are consuming your product or your service. But from our standpoint, as an agency, we're looking ahead of that and we're looking at the communication side of things. So as we maybe have done the audit and we're looking to realign, right? Because we've done that SWOT analysis and we've said, okay, this is where we want to go. What are the recommendations to get back out into the marketplace and effectively communicate this pre-user experience part of your brand?
Well, I think it's difficult for people who are in the communications field, like yourself, because so much of what you do or the integrity of what you do really depends on whether the company or the organization is actually delivering on it. So I think that your first step is really to make sure that there is alignment between kind of your strategy or the position that you believe the company should be adopting and whether the company is there or can get there. You don't want to be setting up an expectation in the customer experience that then you're not able to fulfill. So I think that a lot of the initial steps of a communications program is really just making sure that you've got that internal alignment and integration. Then once you do that, then I think, it becomes much more of a positioning exercise or positioning strategy where you need to identify who are your target core customers, who are going to be the people who value you, who are going to be loyal to you, who are going to be profitable for you as customers. And you identify, as I said, people kind of what are their wants and needs and expectations, and how do you uniquely fill that? And that's where then you can kind of mine that intersection of their need and your value and create creative communications that really show that or manifest or express that intersection. I don't know if I'm answering your question, so tell me if we need to get more detailed or in depth.
No, I think that's good, and I like the targeting aspect of it because I think that there's not enough targeting, honestly, right? Because I think that we have a customer base, but really, if we look at that customer base, we're probably going to be able to segment that into different buckets from, top tier customers down to, kind of low hanging fruit. Hey, it's great. They come in, they go, but they're not really the ones that maybe we want to spend time on. And by doing this alignment between what you're talking about these core customers is to what it is that our core value is, now I know that these are the people that I should be focusing on as I look at customer acquisition.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Joshua. I find that a lot of, either small business owners or entrepreneurs who are scaling have an aversion to targeting because it suggests that they are going to be kind of leaving money on the table, that they are not going to be appealing to every possible person who could be a customer. And, that phrase about if you try to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to no one, it really does apply. I think that the more focused, the clearer, the more salient you can be about your relevance to a particular core, the more likely you'll be able to engage that core and really make a profitable business out of that. And that's not to say that if someone outside of your core comes and wants to do business with you, that you're going to be like, oh, no, sorry, I do, but to your point, it's who are you going to spend your time and energy and money on targeting and really going after?
I'm going to butcher these stats, but a key is a good example of that as far as really identifying a niche market that they want to. And I think that their, 7% of furniture is flat packed furniture, which is, what their forte is. And I think that they own something like 80% of that market. So they weren't trying to be everything to everybody, but they really wanted to narrow it in, because you're right. Being everything to everybody means you're nothing to everyone. So that's a wonderful point. You brought up your book, and I'd like to talk about this, Fusion. It's kind of this intersection between branding and culture. I wanted to just open up, where did this come about? What was the genesis for you to see this and then start putting that together?
Sure. So there are two parts to the story. One is kind of my personal experience working with clients. And then the second part is my observations and research about what was going on in business in general. So first, regarding kind of my personal experience with clients, probably best exemplified by a client I had as a national grocery store chain, a well-established brand. They had me come in one year to try to help them kind of reposition and refresh their brand and actually clarify their positioning as they went into new markets. And it's all about that and setting them up to design great customer experiences that were on brand. And then the next year, they brought me in to work on their employee experience and culture. But they saw these as two separate things. And as I started to kind of say, well, all this brand work we did really suggests that this is what kind of culture you need, they were not connecting the dots. And I thought that if a company like this doesn't get it, there are probably lots of other organizations out there that tend to think that brand and culture are two separate things and really have nothing to do with each other. Yeah. So that's kind of my personal experience. And then the observations, just kind of what has been going on in business. Probably for the last 5 or so years, I feel like the importance of organizational culture has really risen. There's a greater awareness that you need to have a healthy, vital, valuable culture. And, some of that had been precipitated by the war on talent, which is less so during the pandemic and kind of a recovery from the pandemic. But generally speaking, I think that companies realize, if we want to attract and retain the kinds of people that we need to move our business forward, we need to have a culture and an employee experience that really, cultivates the best work and motivates them. But, most of the resources that were out there when I was researching Fusion, talked about you need to have a great culture. Or they might say, of the book by Howard Schultz at Starbucks, this is how I built a great culture at my company. Yeah. But they weren't telling you, for you, your business, your organization, how do you actually build that culture? First of all, how do you determine what kind of culture you should have? And then second, how do you go about cultivating it? And so I wanted to provide a resource that would help people cultivate their cultures and then integrate and align that with their brand.
Okay, so question here. It's a chicken or egg question. Does branding come first or does culture come first? How do we start this? And which end do we look at?
Yeah, I think it could be both. And it really depends on the kind of where you are as an organization. Most of my book, Fusion, is written for companies that have a clearer sense of the brand that they have or they want to have. I think that a lot of times business leaders are oriented towards the market and kind of the value they're creating for customers. And so they have some sense that this is the kind of brand we want. They have less clarity about this is the kind of culture we need in order for us to get there. So I do talk quite a bit about that in the book, but I do have a chapter that's specifically devoted to organizations who have a much clearer, stronger, more kind of, clear perspective on their culture. But they might feel like they're not really getting credit for that out there in the marketplace, or that the unique way that they're engaging their employees is not necessarily translating into the unique ways they could engage their customers. And so I do explain how you can use your culture, start with your culture and then build your brand from there. So it really depends.
Okay. So let's talk about the companies that you're seeing more of, which is they've kind of got the branding aspect done, which is good because, obviously customers are paying our bills. As we look internally and we want to talk about reshaping culture to align to that brand, what are some things that we can do to move people, right? Because I think we've all been in organizations where we clearly have seen that there's a wide gap between brand and culture. How do we get people that maybe are, I'm just going to say tired in an old culture and motivate them to get into the new culture?
Yeah. Well, the number one step really is for the leadership of the organization, and I mean the top leaders of the organization, to embrace their strategic responsibility for culture building. They need to make it a priority. And even though they might not be the ones who are actually executing like the programs and the tactics to build culture, they need to be the ones that say, this is a priority. We're going to invest our time, attention, and money into building our culture. And make sure that there's alignment among the leadership team of, what that kind of culture should be. And then also for that, senior leadership team for them to have a single overarching purpose for the organization and a single set of core values to guide the organization. That's another kind of foundational step that you need to have. So again, you need to know what kind of culture you want. And so by making sure that you have a clear sense of your purpose and clear values, that will lay the foundation for the kind of culture that you want to develop. Once you have that, and once you do an assessment of where you are relative to your desired culture, then you go through the steps that I outlined in my book. And the first one is to organize and operate on brand. And I mean that you need to set up your organization in terms of its design, in terms of its hierarchy, in terms of which departments, work together, as well as your operations, everything from strategic planning to budgeting to your sales process, your product development process. All these operations and your organizational design have so much impact on your culture. And yet most business leaders think that that's something totally separate. Like culture is over here off to the side, and then I'm going to run my business over here. Whereas I think, probably a good metaphor is to think about, when you have a vine that's growing, it needs a trellis to kind of support the direction that you want that vine to grow. And your organizational structure and your processes provide the trellis for your culture to develop. And so that's really kind of the first steps of culture building. And then you go into, creating a culture changing employee experience where you actually are creating experiences, day-to-day experiences for your employees that cultivate the kind of culture you want. You then develop artifacts and rituals and make sure your policies and procedures are all in line and supporting and advancing your culture. And then the last step is really employee brand engagement, making sure that your employees really understand in their heads and are motivated in their hearts, and then they're instructed with their hands and their feet how to support and nurture and interpret your brand and really embrace your brand. And so I've just kind of talked about a lot, but really, it starts with that strategic leadership responsibility for cultivating culture.
Well, that's good because I think, as we think about this, I think it's so nebulous to a lot of people, right? And so I think they know, and I think we all know when we think about what our favorite brands are and we look out in the marketplace, if we take the time to really see all the moving parts of our own individual experience, we see that companies and employees are, there's very strong synergies between, what this experience is top to bottom. But when we look at our own, I think that it's hard to just to map that. And so I like that you've given very clear steps in a process. And I love the trellis metaphor. I love metaphors. And that's a fantastic one that I think is instantly, you've got to guide it, right? It's going to grow. And Howard Behar, former president of Starbucks, he talked about culture and he's like, you may not like the culture you have, but it's the culture you deserve. So if you're not putting in the work to realign it, then that you got what you got. So that's great. I want to talk about the actual book writing process, because I think that, for years I've been hearing, business leaders go write a book, have a POV, put your stake in the sand. But I think the actual process for a lot of us, it seems daunting just to start. But let's just talk about what are some hacks that you have or that you've adopted is you just literally go through that writing process.
Yeah, well, I think you've touched on the first thing, which is that you have to have a point of view. You know,
Mm,
you have to have a unique perspective or insight that you believe that is not being understood or not being embraced out there, and you need to believe how vitally important it is for people to embrace it.
sure.
Because if you're just writing a book just to kind of get some ideas out there, you will never have the motivation and the discipline to get through the very difficult and long process of writing a book. So, once the point of view, the unique point of view that you want to write on, a couple things. One is I hired a great editor on my own, actually for both of my two traditionally published books. So the publishers provided editors for me, but frankly, Joshua, I did not get a lot of value out of those editors. The editors that I hired to help me made the books what they are. I think that they made them to be great books. They helped me translate the ideas that were in my head,
Yeah.
and even the way that I had previously written about things into much better content and
Okay.
into kind of, into a full book. So, I definitely get an editor, a writing partner, even if you go for a ghostwriter,
Yep.
there's no shame in that,
Right.
because it's your ideas, but you just might not have the ability to translate
Yeah.
that into book content. So that's kind of, one secret or hack. And then the other is to have to create a really good detailed outline for your
Mm,
book. So, both of my books are, kind of these like traditionally published 60,000 word books. And so they have, probably, I think my first book has 8 chapters and my second book has 8 or 9.
okay.
And you just go through and you say, okay, this is what chapter 1 is about. And here are the 3 sub points in this chapter. And then
Sure.
here are the examples I'm going to point to, or here are the statistics I'm going to use, or here are the quotes I'm going to use to support these points. Here is the other resources that people can consult if they want. And you just go through and you create this very detailed outline of what you want to, convey in your book. And then when you go to write, you're not staring at a blank page. You're you're looking at something that says, okay, this is the point you want to make. These are the things that you want to draw into, and the writing becomes more of connecting the dots and filling in the gaps, as opposed to coming up with these ideas, kind of on the fly.
Well, that outline becomes the trellis for the vine, right? So I think that
Excellent. And I love it, Joshua.
well, and I want to take another thing that you said, because I think that this is something that I've been hearing more and more of, which is don't write alone, right? You have ideas and you have thoughts, but don't think that you have to be the sole person that gets through that. So I love that you got editors that actually fit you, as opposed to I'll just call traditional grammar police editors that are going to go through and you can't say it this way, but they're not really working with your thoughts. And so whether it's a writing partner, somebody to bounce the ideas off of, I think that that's fantastic. And there is no shame in ghost authors, because hey, it's my POV and that's where you started. Have that unique selling position, whatever that is, start there, but lean on others, because the reality is you're not an author until you've done it the first time. And that struggle, if you're doing it by yourself, can be a really long, intimidating struggle. So kudos to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to shift gears and bring it to a little bit more serious. When we first started this podcast, it was the pandemic, which immediately followed by the economic crash, and what happened shortly thereafter was kind of a big reveal about something that's been there the whole time, which is kind of social injustice. And historically speaking, I think corporations have gotten a pass from being involved in having a position, taking a stand. But I think that that's changing. And so I want to first ask, do you think that that's changing because organizations are actually stepping up? Or do you think that's changing more because consumers are demanding and organizations are chasing organizations are chasing those consumers?
Yeah, I I would say, unfortunately, in most cases, it's the latter. It's the customers who now have the visibility into your organization to understand what you're really like, how you really run your operations, how you treat your employees, how you create value for your communities, or if you create value for your community. Right. And because customers have that, insight, their expectations are elevating and companies are realizing they need to step up. Yeah. Now, there are some enlightened leaders out there who have really paved the way and have made the case for why this really works, that creating shared value, value that all of your stakeholders benefit from, that makes sense. It produces not only great business results, but it produces all these other great benefits as well. But generally speaking, I think that it is a little bit of a pull for business leaders and companies to meet the expectations of customers.
Well, I like how you said it, because I think that both aspects are right, which is I do feel the same as you, that a lot of organizations are following customers, which first off gives a great credence to the power of the consumer, right? And so, right, exactly. If we go back to when we first started businesses, we realized we didn't do it for ourselves. We were satisfying a need from our customers. So even if it's social, then I'm glad that, businesses are recognizing that now. But I also like how you said that leaders that already have taken a strong position, it's more authoritative, it's more recognized, which actually is good business sense, because they have taken that stand. There's everyone in between, right? So there's the pure chasers and there's the pure leaders, and there's everyone in between. As people and organizations start shifting, what are the recommendations? Because this is a very sensitive and delicate topic. And, I certainly hope most people aren't on the purely chasing side of things. But what are the recommendations you have to start addressing some of these things as an organization?
Well, the first step is to listen. Okay. Listen to your customers and listen to your community, and really seek to understand and develop empathy for what they're feeling, what they're needing, and what they're expecting from you. Because to your point, different companies, different contexts, different customers are going to expect different things or want different things from, from the company. I'm sorry, I'm kind of bundling my words a little bit. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. That the needs and expectations vary. And so you need to understand what's going to be right for you and your customers and your community. And so I think listening is the very first step. And then I think it's then to look internally in your organization and look at the values and the kind of culture that you're cultivating and determine, is this really are these really the right values? Is this really the right culture? Do we need to make shifts? Or maybe we have the right stated values, but we're not operationalizing them. And so maybe we need to focus on that. But I think there's a kind of a clear, sober-minded analysis of your own organization to say, are we headed in the right direction? And then where there are gaps between what the customer is telling you that they want and expect from you and how you're currently operating, then you just kind of, I think, one by one, close the gaps. Sometimes you're going to have to start with very tactical, short-term benefit things, like, how many companies are rebranding their products, like Aunt Jemima or Uncle Ben's rice. Yes, take those kind of what I would say are easier tactical changes and make those right away, but then also make sure that you're doing the hard work to really look at how do we need to change how we run our company, how we engage our employees, how we make our products, how we treat our suppliers. You need to do all that work to determine, where there are gaps and then, work to close them.
Well, I like that. I like the, start immediately, because certainly, these brand names that have stuck around for far too long, get those changed, but then continue, right? Have a long-term vision, because really this probably should have happened for an Uncle Ben's to realize, hey, 20 years ago, this is maybe not the right brand name. And if you have that long-term thought, then you're going to be ahead of it. So I think that that's excellent advice. I want to talk about video. So we're experiencing a video revolution, and honestly, a lot of companies such as us, but a lot of thought leaders have been pushing and promoting video for years because it is this emerging channel outside of the traditional broadcast commercials that corporations do. We're talking one-to-one, which I love. It's fantastic. I'd love to be in person, but we can't right now. So how do corporations leverage this? Or how do you see, or what are ideas you have for corporations leveraging this moving forward, now that kind of this facade has been broken down, which is, hey, we can still do things that we didn't think were possible?
Yeah, well, a lot of it comes down to storytelling and making sure that you are using video to highlight the most important stories about your customers and about yourselves and your employees and your communities. But I do want to make sure that I make the point that, storytelling is this kind of buzzword, and a lot of people talk about it. And I think you first need to story do, and then you can story tell. Yeah. Right. So you need to make sure that you are actually doing things that are of value, that are newsworthy, that actually make a difference in someone's life, and then you can bring that to life with the power of video. And I think then kind of cultivate this emotional connection that video really allows you to. So I think that it is looking at video as a storytelling mechanism, but making sure that you aren't kind of making up stories or kind of creating video just for the sake of video, but rather that you as an organization are doing meaningful things that then you can create a wonderful video to tell that to others.
Well, I like it because video, outside of being person to person, video is the most authentic channel. And so to your point, if you don't have a legitimate story, if you are fabricating, people see that. They see through it instantly, right? And so focus first on what is that story, what is the really meaningful moment, and then translate it, and leverage video to showcase it. Staying in the video lane, you are a well-renowned speaker. So you've spoken at countless events all over, but events are just something that's not really happening right now. So I'm curious what you're seeing and how you're adapting now that we're in the world virtual for an indefinite period of time.
Yeah, so definitely all of my engagements for pretty much the back half of this year have been and will continue to be virtual. And I will say that, quite a few event planners and meeting organizers and even, corporate training managers, I think at first when the pandemic happened and the shutdown happened, they kind of put their plans on hold and said, well, we just won't do this event now, but maybe we'll do it later. I think that, in the last couple of months, they've realized that this is the new reality, or at least it's going to be the new reality for at least the next year, if not two. And so we need to proceed with these events. As I say, the show must go on. And so, what is great, and I think what shows the one of the silver linings of this whole pandemic is all these great tech platforms have been developed to actually have these engaging virtual events. Of course, they're not as good as being in person, but they have a lot of the features and benefits of, they can convey a lot of what an event would do and features benefits. And then they can actually do even different, better things. So one of the things that I found as a speaker is, instead of me getting up on stage and doing like a 45-minute keynote and then 15 minutes of Q&A, no one wants to look at just this video for 45 minutes. I would get sick of looking at myself for 45 minutes. So, I'm breaking up my content into shorter, digestible chunks, and then interspersing videos, interspersing polls, interspersing interviews that break up the content, but then also engage people in a way that I wouldn't have been able to if I had been there in person. And so that's what I mean by like taking advantage of some of the new capabilities or new options. And, within like the speaker world, there are people who are doing just fantastic things with multiple screens and studios. And I think we're going to see even more of that as people realize there is a great potential in video to make a virtual event come alive for their participants.
Well, I'm glad you used that come alive, because I think that it's really engagement, as we talk about video, because if it is just, it's monotone, it's static, it's one, because when you're in person, right, and I'm not a speaker by any stretch, but I've spoken, I feed off of the crowd, right? But when it's just static video and you don't have that engagement, then if you're struggling with it, the people that are watching are going to struggle with it. And so anything that you can do to bring engagement, I think, is awesome. So I'm glad to see that you're already witnessing, adaptations, because to your point, this is another year to 2 years. And I think that there will be new mediums for events. Events will come back, but there will be new formats for events, which is exciting to me. I love innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And, one of the things that I would like to see more of is pre and post event engagement. So certainly as a speaker, I'm trying to make the time that I have with my audience as engaging as possible. But I think there's a lot that like the event planner or the meeting organizer can do to engage people before, do those surveys, do those polls, collect those questions, facilitate networking before the event so that when people come, they're already engaged and excited about the content. And then on the back end, that if you can create tools and materials and resources and other ways for connecting with your fellow participants, then people get more value and actually take action out of the session as well. So I think that, one of the things that I'm now starting to talk to the clients that I work with is how can we do both pre and post, as well as, me actually talking to your point, to really just engage people well.
I love it. That's great, because I think that there's so much missed opportunity before and after, that if you're going to invest the time for the event, leverage both sides of that, because it's not just that, that moment, that day that the event actually is. Is there anything else that you think is important that you'd like to share right now?
No, we've covered a lot. So I really appreciate all your questions, Joshua.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much, Denise. It was a pleasure having you on. And I look forward to having you back again in the future.
Thank you. Me too.
Stay safe.